Hey everyone, we are so glad to welcome you with us today. We have a very special guest. Her name is Alyza Lewin, and she is the president of the U.S. Affairs with the Combat Antisemitism Movement. And she has some really interesting things she's going to share with us today. So, welcome, Alyza. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you, Amanda. It's a pleasure to be here.
Alyza, my name's Tyson Lambertson. I'm the U.S. Director of Outreach for the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem. We're grateful that you have jumped on this call with us, and I want to say thank you and thank Cam for the November event in Orlando, where we were able to bring in 300 Christian students, leaders, pastors, influencers from all over the United States to make a huge difference in fighting anti-Semitism. And so thank you, thank you, thank you. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to doing it again.
Well,
Alyssa, I
thank
want to
you.
ask, yeah.
I remember that conference very well because I had been at CAM 1 week. That was my first
Oh,
big CAM
first,
event. It was exciting, and I was really thrilled to be part of that. It was a special program. Thank you.
wonderful. Well, I have a question for you. And this is something that we've talked about a lot, but when you think about it, what would you classify or how would you define anti-Semitism today?
So, anti-Semitism is when Jews are demonized, dehumanized, vilified, and the they're targeted based on their Jewishness. One of the biggest challenges, though, that we have today is that many people don't understand Jewishness. And so as a result, they don't understand and recognize anti-Semitism. For example, there are those who define anti-Semitism way too narrowly. They think of Jews as only a religion. So they think of anti-Semitism as only something that targets Jews on the basis of their religious belief or their religious practice or their religious dress, like wearing a kippah, a skull cap, for example. But Judaism for Jews is about much more than that. It's also about Jewish peoplehood, about feeling connected to Jews around the world, and about feeling connected to Jews throughout history, going all the way back to biblical times. And it's also part of the recognition that the Jewish people as a people have had an ancient connection to the land of Israel. And so today, what happens is there are those who are hostile to the very notion that the Jews see themselves as a people with a history root in the land of Israel. And so they target Jews on that basis. And they demand that the Jews somehow disavow this part of their Jewishness in order to be accepted today. That is some of today's anti Semitism and some of the anti Semitism that many people still don't understand.
Thank you for so much for sharing that and giving that concise overview. Now, when you think of the United States, can you give us a little perspective about what you're seeing with the current state of anti-Semitism in the US?
Sure. The sad thing about the anti-Semitism in the United States is that it's coming from really all fronts. It's coming from the extreme right, it's coming from the extreme left, it's coming from radical Islamists. These, quite frankly, are groups that don't have America's interest at heart. They want to really destroy our 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 Western civilization, our freedoms, the America that we know and love. And so whether it's, as I say, the extreme right, uh, I just recently, June 14th, when they discovered and uncovered a terror attack that was targeting the Freedom 250 event that President Trump had organized at the White House, they realized that the folks who were responsible for it were part of what they called accelerationists in terms of their ideology, which was they actually believed that through mass violence, they could accelerate the downfall of America and bring about a white ethno state. On the extreme left, you have those who are promoting communism and want to replace America with that. And then you have those radical Islamists who would like to replace America with a caliphate governed by Sharia law. Each of these extreme groups have realized that in order to rile up and gain followers throughout history, what folks discover is that to do that, you need to have a common boogeyman. You need to have a scapegoat that can unite your followers against a common, single, simple target. And unfortunately, all of those groups have identified the Jew as the scapegoat. And so they may slightly vary in the nuance of the messaging, but ultimately the message is that the Jews are somehow, through their power and control, or conspiring to harm humanity. The Jews are who we should blame for why things go wrong. The Jews are the ones who are what the reason is why we aren't getting from society what we need. And that's part of the explosion in anti-Semitism today in America, is that the Jews are being treated as the scapegoat, and folks are not recognizing how that's exploding. And it's exploding in part also because of social media, because social media makes it so easy for these messages to be spread.
Yeah, so you mentioned some examples of anti-Semitism in that people see. What are some examples in the United States of maybe anti-Semitism that's not recognizable? It's more covert, more under the table, so to speak.
Wow, yes, I'm glad you asked that, because right after October 7th, and there's been anti-Semitism on the rise, we should make clear, starting well before October 7th, 2023. But after October 7th, 2023, you saw the demonstrations and the encampments, very loud, noisy anti-Semitism, right? Where Jewish students were excluded from spaces on campus. Schools started after that to really start to clamp down on that very loud, obvious anti-Semitism. But the problem is that there's been this messaging against Zionists, and I think Christian Zionists may feel that same messaging, right? Where the idea is that if anyone recognizes or supports the idea that Jews are also a people and they have a history and heritage rooted in the land of Israel, somehow, right, if you believe in the Bible, if you believe in the Old Testament, and you recognize the Jewish people and the Jewish people's history rooted in that land of Israel, if you understand that, if you understand God's promise to the Jewish people, you are branded a Zionist, which suddenly makes you deserving not only of being treated as a pariah and shunned and excluded, but now worse, right? You have assaults, you have vandalism that talks about killing Zionists, or and that is what I have heard from students is that the truth is now on campuses, for example, you don't need people to be proclaiming no Zionists welcome here, right? Because it's just known, it's already accepted, and that there are students who recognize that there are spaces where they as Zionists are just not welcome, and so they don't go there. They don't belong to those clubs. They don't socialize with those groups. And that, I think, is some of the silent, if you want to call it, discrimination and shunning that's taking place that's really anti-Semitic, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to measure it. Right? I had one student who told me a story about how she had been in a theater club and always used to socialize with the friends from the group just after, in between plays, and they would go and hang out. And suddenly she discovered, not long after October 7th, that she'd been dropped from the email group, and that was no longer being notified. And even worse, that when she would now pass people who had once been her friends on campus, they would walk past without acknowledging her, as if she no longer existed. That's some of the kind of quiet anti-Semitism that I think exists now today in America.
Wow, that's heart-wrenching and so sad to think about. And that's just one example. I know there's so many more. When you think about Christians and this audience that we have today, believers, what would you say to Christians about the importance of being concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism and how important that concern would be?
So it's hugely, it should be hugely concerning to Christians, both because, as I explained, so much of it is being spread by people who are, quite frankly, anti-Christian as well, who are anti the Judeo-Christian values that form the bedrock of our society, who are looking to uproot and destroy that. So this is not just about Jews. This is about our freedoms, our religious liberties in America. And I think, as I said, it's starting with just the erasure of our Bible, right? I think it's really important to read the Old Testament. I think it's really important to study the Old Testament to begin to appreciate not only who the Jewish people are, but also the concepts, the ideas that Judaism introduced to the world that then formed, right, the ideas that are the bedrock of America. So yeah, I think it's definitely an issue that needs to be of concern, not just to Jews, but to Christians as well.
There's no doubt we need to read our Bible and read the Old Testament and understand it and study it because it tells a story. Now, I see a picture behind you and I see some biblical significance there. Why don't you explain that to us real quick?
Sure. What's behind me is a painting that my sister painted for our wedding. It's traditional in a Jewish marriage ceremony for the couple to get married under a marriage canopy that's open on four sides, symbolizing Abraham's tent. The idea being that your home should be a place that's welcoming to visitors, and hospitality for others. But what's significant is the week of our wedding was the week that in the Bible, that we would read the Bible portion that talks about the story of Jacob's ladder, when Jacob was leaving the land of Israel and he had this dream of a ladder that extended from earth up to heaven, and the angels were going up and down the ladder. And according to Genesis 28, as part of this dream, what God said to Jacob was, I am with you, I will protect you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken of to you. And in that verse in Hebrew, the verse actually has my initials and my husband's initials, and this idea of a promise that we won't abandon each other until we've fulfilled the promises that we've given to one another was something that we felt was also a verse that could be something that we were saying to one another at our wedding. But it's very much has the biblical reference, has my name in Hebrew, my husband's name in Hebrew on the canopy. But that's what's behind me.
Oh, I love that. That's so precious. I love that it was at your wedding and how that all comes together. So beautiful. Um, so we'd love to hear your perspective about just some different things people can do to make a difference. Like, what can we do as Christians with what you've just shared today about the anti-Semitism that's rising? It seems so daunting, but what are some practical things you would recommend?
So one of the things is, as I said, for Jews, Jewishness is about more than just religious faith, religious belief, religious practice. It's also about our peoplehood. It's also about, as I say, the history of the Jewish people described in the Old Testament. And what you hear today and see today is this very deliberate campaign to erase and deny that, right? People are insisting that the Jews are not a people, that the Jews have no history in the land of Israel, that they showed up as colonizers in 1948. Go back to somewhere. I don't know where we're supposed to go back to when this is our indigenous homeland. The Jews are indigenous to Judea, and that's why Jews, right? Judea in Hebrew is Yehudah. Jews in Hebrew are Yehudim. The Jews came from Judea, and yet there are those who will erase that today, right? I was once speaking with an Israeli, and I said, do you view yourselves as part of a people, the Jewish people, of course, connected to Jews around the world? And I said, do you feel that if you scratch the dirt in the land of Israel, you're going to uncover archaeology that proves and demonstrates the history of our people, of the Jewish people here in this land? And they said, yes, of course. I said, so why don't you just say that all the time? And he said, because it's obvious. He says, you're asking me to say, like, I have two ears. And he said, well, do you know that on campuses in America today, there are people who are actually studying how Israelis, to use your analogy, have no ears? And it's not just Israelis, it's by extension Jews have no ears. And if you don't start pushing back and saying the obvious, yes, the Jewish people are from this land. This is the heartland, right, from where the Jewish people came. And if you don't start pushing back and insisting that people see your ears, then soon we'll have folks who are getting degrees in the discipline of how Israelis and by extension Jews have no ears. So I think that one of the most important things that people could do, Christians and Jews alike, is say, Jews have ears, right? Jews are a people. They have a history and heritage rooted in the land of Israel. Stop trying to erase and deny that. Some folks have called that even erasive anti-Semitism because it's erasing who the people are. And I think that to the extent that the Christian community can help push back against that, that would be incredibly valuable.
you just gave us some practical, real life, right now application. So thank you, thank you, thank you. In fact, tomorrow I have a lunch with a rabbi that I've begun to have a relationship with. The Jews are human people. They have emotion. They have a physical being. They are real people, and we need to let people know that they are real. It's not just somebody that we talk about. We're talking about a human being made in the image of God. Despite all these challenges, all the challenges that the Jewish people are facing, what gives you the most hope?
What gives me the most hope are conversations like this and people like the folks who are watching this video, right? There are good people in this world who are able to see and recognize evil and who are able to recognize threats to our humanity. And I see it. And what gives me hope is the courage that I see exhibited by, I will say, really young Zionists today, Jews and Christians, who, even in the face of some of the worst pressure to try and disavow and shed their Zionism, right? To shed their, whether it's their, as Jews, their pride in their history and heritage, whether it's as Christian Zionists, their pride in their faith and their belief and understanding of the Old Testament and God's promise. That takes courage today. It shouldn't have to take courage, but it takes courage today. And I see it. I see it every day. And that courage and that confidence gives strength to others to have courage and confidence to do the same. And that's what gives me hope. That's what gives me hope.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing. That's really cool. If you could leave our audience with one final encouragement or challenge, what would it be? Go full force. We can handle it. Bring it to us.
Boy. More so than I'm trying to think something else in addition to kind of what we've just said. Give me a minute. Okay. If I could give one last word of advice to this audience, I would say God should give you and bless you with the strength to be strongly, confidently, fiercely you, right? Don't let anyone in this world intimidate you into silence. Don't let anyone in this world make you feel uncomfortable about who you are and your faith and what you believe, right? Stand up proudly, stand up strong, because that's what we need. And that's what's going to bring the redemption. That's what's going to ultimately prevail in this world. And you need to be the leaders, and you'll be the leaders. So God should just bless you with that strength and that courage and that confidence to persevere. Really wishing you all that blessing.
Alyza, thank you so much for being with us today and encouraging us. Thank you for everything that CAM does, not only in the United States, but around the world. It's fascinating to me the things that CAM, Combating Anti-Semitism Movement, is involved in across the globe. And we are standing with you. We're praying for you. You're not alone. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you,
God bless you.
Alyza. We're thankful for you. Blessings. Bye-bye.
Thank you.